What if the next global economic superpower isn't China or the United States, but Mexico? In the shadow of one of the most intense geopolitical rivalries of our time, a quiet transformation is underway. While Washington and Beijing clash in a high-stakes economic war, fighting over semiconductors, shipping lanes, influence and supply chains, Mexico is reaping the rewards. Not with noise, not with missiles, but with strategy, geography, and timing. Right now, the US-China conflict is not just destabilizing trade routes, it's rewriting them, and Mexico is becoming the unexpected winner. For decades, globalization revolved around China, the world's factory. American corporations pumped billions into the Chinese economy, seduced by low wages and streamlined manufacturing. But things have changed. Trade tensions exploded under the Trump administration, and the Biden administration doubled down. Sanctions, tariffs, and export controls now define the relationship between these two superpowers. What once was cooperation has turned into a calculated decoupling. Caught in the middle is the global supply chain. But as companies look for a way out of China, they're not going far. They're looking south, enter Mexico. Just across the border from the world's largest consumer market, Mexico offers a unique mix of proximity, trade agreements, and skilled labor. The term nearshoring has become a buzzword in boardrooms from New York to Tokyo, and it's not theory, it's already happening. Factories are popping up in Monterrey, Querétaro, and Guadalajara. Tech firms, auto giants, and logistics companies are rerouting investments straight into Mexican soil. But while much of the media focuses on border towns and maquiladoras, a much deeper story is unfolding where few are looking. The Isthmus of Tehuantepec. You may never have heard of it, but this narrow strip of land in southern Mexico could become one of the most strategic trade corridors on the planet. Known as the Trans-Isthmus Project, this ambitious initiative, backed by billions in investment and intense geopolitical interest, is poised to rival the Panama Canal as a new bridge between the Pacific and Atlantic. It's a bold bet. Trains, highways, ports, industrial parks. It's a logistical network designed not just to move goods, but to shift power. Because whoever controls the flow of trade controls the future. And everyone's watching. The United States, wary of Chinese expansion in Latin America, sees the project as a chance to secure influence in its own hemisphere. China, on the other hand, views it as a potential backdoor into American markets. Europe, South Korea, and even Middle Eastern nations are quietly investing too. But at the center of it all is Mexico, charting its own course, navigating rivalries, and seizing a once-in-a-generation opportunity. This isn't just economics, it's geopolitics in motion. The Trans-Isthmus Corridor isn't merely about transportation, it's about migration control, energy routes, military logistics, and technological sovereignty. It's about transforming Mexico from a junior partner into a central player, and in a world where superpowers clash and alliances shift overnight, Mexico may be the only country turning chaos into leverage. So the question isn't whether the US-China economic war will shape the future. It already is. The real question is whether Mexico is prepared to hold the weight of that future and what it will cost the world if it does. Because what's happening on the isthmus isn't just about moving containers or connecting oceans. It's about redefining global influence. It's about a Latin American nation stepping into the vacuum left by a fractured world order and doing it on its own terms. So, let's dive deep. How did Mexico become the unlikely winner of a war it never started? Why is the Trans-Isthmus Project suddenly attracting the attention of the world's most powerful governments? And what does it mean for the future of trade, migration, energy, and global control? Before we unpack it all, I want to know your thoughts. Do you think Mexico is truly ready to become a global trade power? Or is it being used as a pawn between the US and China? Drop your opinion in the comments. Let's open this conversation. If this topic grabs you, hit the like button to support this kind of independent analysis. And if you want to stay ahead of the curve on global power shifts, subscribe to the channel now. There's so much more coming your way. Now let's break down exactly how this silent revolution in Mexico is unfolding and why the world should be paying attention. The US-China rivalry shifts the global trade map. As the world watches the growing rivalry between the United States and China, what most people don't realize is that this confrontation is not only disrupting global politics, it's redrawing the trade map. For decades, the global economy has operated under the assumption that China would remain the undisputed hub of manufacturing. Factories, raw materials, supply chains, all roads led to the People's Republic. But in recent years, this assumption has started to crumble. What began as a trade dispute has evolved into a full-blown economic Cold War, reshaping global alliances, investment flows, and trade corridors. And in the wake of this seismic shift, a new actor is rising, not as a side player, but as a pivotal link in the emerging world order: Mexico. It started quietly. In 2018, when the Trump administration imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese goods, Beijing responded in kind. The trade war became a reality. Companies that had once thrived off cheap Chinese manufacturing began to suffer under mounting costs and delays. By the time the Biden administration took office, the tone had shifted, but the strategy remained the same. National security and technological competition replaced tariff rhetoric, but the core message stayed intact: decouple from China. This message sent shockwaves across corporate boardrooms. Suddenly, logistics executives and global strategists were scrambling to reimagine their supply chains. It wasn't just about saving money anymore. It was about resilience, proximity, and political safety. In this moment of uncertainty, Mexico emerged as the obvious alternative. Close to the US market, protected by the USMCA trade agreement, politically aligned, and most importantly, eager to rise. But what's really fascinating isn't just that companies are leaving China. It's how fast they're doing it and where they're going. The global shift is accelerating. Automotive giants, electronics manufacturers, even pharmaceutical firms are abandoning long-established routes through Asia and rerouting their operations through North America. In many cases, Mexico isn't just a fallback option. It's becoming the first choice. Why? Because the US-China conflict is no longer about tariffs or trade deficits. It's about power, control, future dominance. From semiconductors to rare earths, from 5G networks to green technologies, the battlefield has expanded. And each move made by Washington or Beijing triggers a new wave of realignments across the globe. In this volatile environment, every nation is trying to reposition itself. Mexico, by virtue of geography and timing, is in the perfect place to benefit. But this isn't just theory, it's already happening. Drive through the industrial parks of northern Mexico and you'll see massive facilities bearing the logos of companies that just 5 years ago were operating exclusively in China. Monterrey is exploding with tech investment. Guadalajara is becoming a new Silicon Valley of Latin America. Even cities like Tijuana, once known only for assembly plants, are evolving into high-tech export hubs. All of this is being quietly accelerated by a trade war that was never Mexico's fight, but is quickly becoming Mexico's gain. And yet, the true scale of this transformation goes beyond economics. Because when trade routes change, power follows. The rise of Mexico as a manufacturing center is reshaping how the US projects influence in the Western Hemisphere. It also forces China to rethink its access to American markets. This isn't just about factories, it's about strategy. The US is heavily incentivized to secure its southern supply chain, not just to compete with China, but to ensure that its economy isn't vulnerable to distant disruptions. At the same time, China is responding by increasing its footprint in Latin America, investing in ports, railways, and even tech infrastructure, and that sets the stage for a complex, high-stakes game, with Mexico caught at the very center. But here's the twist. Mexico isn't playing the victim, it's playing its cards. By maintaining relationships with both Washington and Beijing, while strategically developing internal infrastructure, Mexico is building leverage. Unlike in past decades, it's not waiting for others to define its role. It's defining it for itself. And nowhere is that more visible than in the government's push for major logistics projects, especially the Trans-Isthmus Corridor, which we'll explore in detail next. For now, the takeaway is this. The US-China rivalry is doing more than disrupting global trade. It's creating new winners. And while superpowers fight for dominance, Mexico is cashing in on the chaos. Let's open the floor to you. Do you believe Mexico can keep up this momentum, or will external pressure pull it back into dependency? Drop your answer in the comments below. You can simply write, "Mexico is rising," if you're optimistic, or "Too soon to tell," if you're not convinced yet. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if this kind of deep dive content keeps you thinking. Nearshoring boom, why companies are fleeing. Asia for Mexico. The shift wasn't gradual. It was an avalanche. What started as hesitation among CEOs, fear of supply chain disruption, concern over rising tariffs, quickly snowballed into a full-fledged corporate exodus. Boardrooms across Europe, Asia, and North America realized they could no longer afford to bet everything on a single region. The risks of operating in China became crystal clear. Geopolitical uncertainty, surveillance concerns, zero-COVID lockdowns that paralyzed entire sectors, and above all, the looming threat of US sanctions that could turn operational advantages into liabilities overnight. So the question for thousands of companies became not if they should relocate, but where. And again, all roads began pointing to Mexico. But this isn't the same Mexico from 20 years ago. This is a country at the crossroads of a new industrial era, aligning itself with global trends in automation, green energy, smart logistics, and data sovereignty. The term nearshoring has become a buzzword for a reason. It's not just about moving production closer to the consumer. It's about rethinking the architecture of global commerce entirely. What used to be a game of low wages has now become a game of resilience and adaptability, and few countries check as many boxes on that list as Mexico does today. Corporations are discovering that manufacturing just across the border from the United States offers them more than savings. It gives them security. Instead of dealing with 30-day shipping cycles from Shenzhen, they can move products by truck or rail in less than a week. Instead of navigating Chinese political constraints, they're protected under the USMCA agreement. That's not just efficiency, that's insurance. In a world addicted to instant delivery, volatile consumer demand, and fragile global systems, speed and certainty are the new currency. What's happening now in cities like Monterrey, Saltillo, and León is nothing short of a modern industrial gold rush. Massive investments are pouring into logistics hubs, smart warehouses, and regional tech ecosystems. Companies are setting up not just factories, but full innovation centers, training Mexican engineers in cutting-edge automation, AI-driven quality control, and next-gen energy systems. And that's where the deeper story begins to unfold. Because nearshoring isn't just about moving the where of production, it's changing the how. It's creating jobs in sectors that were once off-limits to emerging economies. It's putting pressure on the Mexican education system to produce a new kind of workforce, bilingual, technically skilled, globally aware. And it's also raising the stakes for energy infrastructure, digital security, and political alignment. You can't attract billions in high-end manufacturing without offering stable energy grids, fast data networks, and a regulatory environment that gives confidence to foreign capital. That's why you're starting to see discussions not just about trade, but about energy reform, connectivity corridors, and even cybersecurity laws. Nearshoring is pushing Mexico to upgrade every pillar of its domestic capability, whether it's ready or not. And here's something few analysts are talking about. Nearshoring doesn't only benefit US corporations. Asian companies, yes, even Chinese ones, are joining the wave. In a twist of irony, Chinese firms are now opening production sites in Mexico to bypass the very tariffs meant to keep them out. They're playing the rules of globalization 2.0 better than anyone else. They're blending into Mexican supply chains, co-investing in local infrastructure, and using the country as a springboard into North America. It's a brilliant move, and a troubling one for policymakers trying to control influence without stifling growth. So as American and European companies pour into Mexican territory, so do Asian players, creating a complex web of competition and collaboration. And Mexico stands at the center, managing a balancing act few countries could pull off. Its success in this moment doesn't just come from policy or location, it comes from leverage. The kind of leverage that only appears when the world order is shifting and everyone is searching for new ground. That's what makes this nearshoring boom so unique. It's not temporary. It's not a passing trend. It's the early architecture of a new trade reality, one where regional supply chains replace global ones, and where Mexico becomes a critical node in how goods, data, and value move across borders. Think about it. In a world shaken by pandemics, wars, and economic decoupling, who controls the choke points of trade? That question used to be answered in Brussels, Beijing, or Washington. Now increasingly the answer might be found in Oaxaca, Veracruz, or Coatzacoalcos, which leads us directly into what may be the boldest infrastructure move Mexico has made in decades, the Trans-Isthmus project. But before we go there, I want to hear from you. What's your take on this nearshoring wave? Do you see it as a long-term transformation or just a reaction to global panic? Drop a comment with your view. You can even leave a simple phrase to join the conversation. Try, Mexico is the new trade hub if you believe in this momentum, or still too unstable if you think it's early to celebrate. And if this topic is opening your eyes to the bigger picture behind the headlines, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started. The Trans-Isthmus Mega Project, Mexico's silent revolution. As companies flood into Mexico and supply chains rewire themselves in real time, a larger question starts to surface. Where is all this new trade volume going to move? Roads have limits, ports are congested, airports can't carry the weight of mass production. The traditional north-south corridors between Mexico and the United States, though vital, weren't designed to handle a wave of industrialization at this scale. That's where the conversation takes a sharp and unexpected turn to a part of Mexico that has, for most of modern history, been overlooked and underestimated. A narrow strip of land in the southern region of the country, a place where oceans almost touch, a place called the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. The Trans-Isthmus Project, known formally as the Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, is not just an infrastructure plan, it's a vision, a reimagining of Mexico's role in global logistics. It's the idea that Mexico doesn't have to be just a pass-through for trade. It can be the connective tissue between the Pacific and Atlantic, between Asia and the Americas, between manufacturing hubs and consumer markets. Stretching from the port of Salina Cruz on the Pacific Ocean to Coatzacoalcos on the Gulf of Mexico, this corridor spans just over 300 kilometers. But its geopolitical implications stretch much further, across continents and into the calculations of the world's biggest powers. For decades, the Panama Canal has served as the default path for interoceanic shipping in the Western Hemisphere. But today, that canal faces serious limitations. Climate change has lowered water levels, ship traffic is maxed out, and political uncertainty in Central America raises red flags for long-term investment. The Trans-Isthmus Corridor offers an alternative, and not just a symbolic one. We're talking about a multi-modal logistics chain that integrates ports, railways, highways, and energy infrastructure. Imagine cargo containers landing on one coast, moving by rail across the isthmus, and being reloaded onto ships within hours. No waiting in canal queues, no dependency on foreign choke points, no middlemen. What's unfolding here is a logistical countermove in the global chess game of commerce. It's backed by Mexican public investment, but also by serious private and international interest. US government agencies have earmarked the corridor as a strategic priority under regional development initiatives. Asian and European investors are watching closely. Even Middle Eastern logistics firms are scouting locations. Why? Because whoever gains influence over this corridor can shape the future of hemispheric trade. And in a world where distance is no longer the enemy, disruption is. That kind of control is priceless. But there's another layer to this mega project that makes it even more fascinating. It's not just about transporting goods, it's about creating industrial ecosystems along the way. The Mexican government has announced a network of industrial parks that will stretch across the corridor's path, offering tax incentives, legal protections, and infrastructure support to companies willing to set up shop. These aren't random factories. They're targeted sectors: aerospace, electronics, clean energy, agro-industry, each one strategically positioned to tie into both domestic supply chains and export markets. What's being built isn't just a corridor, it's a manufacturing spine, a backbone of economic reorganization. And once it's fully operational, it could shift trade patterns for decades. There's a quiet genius in how this is being approached. While the media remains focused on northern Mexico and US border politics, the isthmus is being transformed almost out of sight, away from controversy, away from international scrutiny. And that silence is exactly what makes it powerful. Because while attention remains on crisis zones and global tensions, Mexico is building the infrastructure of its future, brick by brick, rail by rail, without asking anyone's permission. And this project isn't just economic, it's deeply political. It represents a reassertion of southern Mexico in the national dialogue. For years, this region has been left out of the country's major development plans, seen as rural, poor, and peripheral. The Trans-Isthmus project is rewriting that narrative. It's integrating Oaxaca and Veracruz into the global trade map. It's giving historically marginalized communities a direct stake in global commerce. And it's forcing national and international actors to confront a new geopolitical equation, where development isn't concentrated in capitals or tech hubs, but in corridors that cut across geography, history, and identity. That's what makes this moment so crucial. The nearshoring boom gave Mexico the momentum, but the Trans-Isthmus Corridor could cement its future. It's no longer just about responding to a global crisis. It's about engineering a new normal, one where Mexico is not only a beneficiary of global trends, but a shaper of them. The roads, rails, and ports being built today are more than logistics tools. They're instruments of power. And in the emerging post-globalization era, infrastructure is power. Which brings us to the next chapter. Because once this infrastructure is in place, the real question becomes, who is actually investing in it? And what do they expect in return? But before we get there, I want your insight on this. How do you see the Trans-Isthmus project? Is it a visionary move or just political ambition dressed up as progress? Let's make it interactive. Drop a comment with, "The corridor is the key," if you believe this project will change Mexico's future, or "Still too early to tell," if you're more cautious. Either way, I want to hear from you. And if you're feeling the depth of this story, hit that like button and subscribe. The next layer of this journey will take us even deeper. Geopolitics meets geography. Why the isthmus matters. When we talk about trade routes, infrastructure, and investment, we often speak in numbers: miles of track, Billions of dollars, tons of cargo. But underneath those numbers lies something deeper, something more elemental: geography. The kind of geography that has shaped empires, triggered wars, and dictated the rise and fall of civilizations. And in the case of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, it's geography that has once again become destiny. This narrow stretch of land in southern Mexico is only about 200 kilometers wide at its slimmest point. But in today's global economy, those 200 kilometers might as well be the fulcrum on which entire trade systems pivot. This isn't a new idea. Long before the Panama Canal ever existed, global powers looked to the isthmus as the most logical route to connect the Atlantic and the Pacific. The Spanish crown studied it. Napoleon's advisors theorized about it. Even the Americans in the 19th century considered it a viable option before settling on Panama. What held it back for centuries wasn't potential. It was politics, instability, and lack of vision. Now, in the 21st century, that vision is finally being realized. But what makes the timing so important is that this project is unfolding during one of the most fragile and fragmented geopolitical moments of our lifetime. The global order that defined the last 70 years, American-led, trade-driven, and relatively stable, is eroding. Regional conflicts are on the rise. Trust in multilateral institutions is crumbling. Great power rivalry is back, not just in rhetoric, but in economic and military planning. In this climate, geography becomes a tool of strategy, and every choke point becomes a source of leverage. That's exactly what makes the isthmus so valuable. It's not just a shortcut, it's a strategic alternative, a hedge against instability, a route that bypasses contested waters, cyber-vulnerable shipping lanes, and politically sensitive zones. It offers control, flexibility, options. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because this isn't just a Mexican project, it's becoming a geopolitical asset that multiple countries want a piece of. The United States sees it as a way to solidify its influence in Latin America at a time when Chinese soft power is gaining traction across the region. For Washington, investing in the corridor isn't just good economics, it's strategic containment. It's a way to embed American companies and standards into the arteries of future trade. On the other hand, countries like South Korea and Germany view the corridor through a different lens. For them, it's about diversification. They're watching supply chains fracture, energy costs fluctuate, and trans-Pacific routes grow riskier. The isthmus offers them a second path, one that doesn't rely on any single superpower. And then there's China. Ironically, the very country that this shift is supposedly meant to counter is also investing, quietly but deliberately. Chinese companies have expressed interest in logistics hubs, port operations, and industrial partnerships along the route. It's a classic move: embed influence not through politics, but through infrastructure. Because once you control a node in the supply chain, you shape everything that flows through it: data, goods, investment, and even policy decisions. That's why the Trans-Isthmus Corridor is no longer just a national project. It's a contested space, a space where foreign policy goals collide with commercial interests, where development agendas overlap with security concerns, and where Mexico finds itself in the rare position of being the broker, not the subordinate. That shift in position, subtle but powerful, is what marks this moment as revolutionary. For the first time in modern history, Mexico has a project on its soil that is pulling the world toward it, not the other way around. And it's not just about cargo. What flows through this corridor will shape discussions around migration, energy, and digital sovereignty. Think about it. Data centers and fiber optic networks are already being planned as part of the corridor's infrastructure. That means whoever operates these routes doesn't just move goods, they move information. That's 21st century power, the kind of power that makes or breaks trade alliances, influences legislation, and determines who gets to write the rules of the next economy. In this sense, geography is no longer just physical, it's digital, strategic, and symbolic. The Isthmus of Tehuantepec is becoming more than a corridor. It's becoming a signal, a declaration that Mexico is not just participating in the new global game, it's influencing where and how the game is played. It's a recalibration of roles, a reshuffling of influence, and while the rest of the world rushes to secure its own interests, the corridor stretches quietly across the landscape, concrete and steel laid over centuries of dormant potential. Now, I want to hear what you think about this transformation. Do you see the isthmus as a new geopolitical frontier? Or is it simply another project that might get lost in the noise of global competition? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you're seeing the global picture here, leave a phrase like "geography is power" or "the corridor changes everything," so we know you're following the deeper currents of this story. And of course, if this content is giving you a new lens on how the world really works, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. We're heading into even more complex to who's investing and why. When you follow the money, you start to uncover the true intentions behind a project. The Trans-Isthmus Corridor may be a national initiative on paper, but in practice, it's becoming a magnet for foreign capital. And that capital doesn't just come with dollars and contracts, it comes with agendas. The list of countries and corporations with their eyes on this narrow stretch of Mexican territory is growing fast. But behind every investment, there's a deeper play at work. And understanding who's getting involved and why is the key to seeing what this corridor really represents in the global game of influence. At first glance, the main investor appears to be the Mexican government itself. Billions of pesos have already been funneled into port renovations, railway upgrades, and the construction of industrial parks. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find the fingerprints of far more powerful entities. The United States, through agencies like the US, International Development Finance Corporation, has shown increasing interest in financing pieces of the corridor, not just as a way to promote development, but as a counterweight to Chinese economic expansion. Washington sees this project as more than infrastructure. It sees it as a line of defense in a growing ideological and technological divide. By embedding American companies into the DNA of the corridor, the US can exert long-term influence over how trade is conducted, who benefits from it, and what standards govern it. Yet this isn't a one-sided story, because while the US is playing offense, so is China. Through state-owned enterprises, investment banks, and private conglomerates with close political ties, Beijing is quietly making its own inroads. It's offering equipment, logistics services, and partnerships that come with fewer strings attached, at least on the surface. Chinese firms know how to play the long game. They've done it across Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of Europe. The formula is familiar: fund infrastructure, integrate with local economies, build dependency, and the corridor, with its massive logistical potential, fits perfectly into China's global Belt and Road ambitions, even if unofficially. What makes this dynamic even more fascinating is the complexity of the competition. This isn't a simple tug-of-war between two superpowers. South Korea has stepped in with industrial tech proposals. Germany has offered clean energy integration strategies. The Netherlands is exploring ways to connect the corridor's ports to its own shipping networks. Even the United Arab Emirates, with its powerful logistics conglomerates, is rumored to be assessing opportunities for port management and free zone administration. Each player brings a different motive. Some want trade access, others want energy leverage, and a few are betting on the long-term value of influence over infrastructure. That's where things get subtle and strategic. Infrastructure diplomacy is the new face of global influence. No need for troops or coups. Just build, lay down rails, modernize ports, digitize customs, provide capital when no one else will. The country that finances your roads often ends up shaping your policies, your regulations, your alliances. It's soft power, but with hard consequences. And Mexico, sitting at the intersection of all these offers, must now navigate a diplomatic labyrinth where every dollar comes with invisible conditions. But here's the twist. Mexico is learning to leverage this competition. Instead of aligning blindly with one side, it's beginning to act like a geopolitical broker, accepting US financing for one segment, Chinese equipment for another, engaging European partners on tech while working with Asian firms on logistics. This multi-alignment strategy is risky, but it's also smart. It gives Mexico the ability to negotiate from strength, to play investors against each other, to demand better terms. It also reduces overdependence on any one partner, something Latin America has historically struggled to escape. Still, this balancing act won't be easy. The pressure will grow. Behind closed doors, lobbyists, diplomats, and executives are already shaping the corridor's legal and economic framework. Decisions made in the next few years about who gets construction rights, who runs the ports, who manages the data, will have repercussions for decades, because this project is more than steel and concrete. It's a strategic architecture, and the people who build that architecture will shape how power flows through it. There's also the question of domestic perception. As foreign investments increase, so does public scrutiny. Who benefits? Will locals be displaced? Will profits stay in Mexico or flow back to foreign capitals? These questions aren't abstract. They're central to the corridor's legitimacy, and that legitimacy will determine whether the project unites the country or becomes another symbol of exploitation dressed up as progress. Mexico must ensure that international capital serves national goals, not the other way around. This is the moment when infrastructure stops being just infrastructure and becomes identity. Mexico is at a crossroads, not just geographically, but diplomatically. It has a chance to create a hybrid model of development, one that fuses global investment with national control. But it must tread carefully, because the eyes of the world are now watching, not just to see what Mexico builds, but who really owns what's being built. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Do you believe Mexico can truly play both sides and remain independent? Or will the pressure from global investors eventually force it to choose? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you're feeling bold, leave a phrase like "Mexico holds the cards" or "too many hands on the wheel" to let us know where you stand. And if you're finding this deeper geopolitical perspective valuable, hit like and subscribe, because in the next topic, we're going to explore what the US wants from this corridor versus what Mexico is actually gaining. Rittery in the next section. What the US wants versus what Mexico gains. To truly understand the strategic value of the Trans-Isthmus Corridor, you have to separate two very different perspectives. What the United States wants from this project and what Mexico is actually getting out of it. These are not always aligned, and that friction, that divergence of intent and outcome, is exactly what makes this moment so geopolitically charged. Because while Washington sees the corridor as a strategic asset to safeguard its own hemispheric interests, Mexico is beginning to treat it as a launching pad for something far more ambitious: economic autonomy. Let's start with the US viewpoint. From the halls of the Pentagon to the corridors of Capitol Hill, the anxiety over China's global influence is palpable. Washington doesn't just want to secure trade routes. It wants to build fortified corridors of commerce that are free from Chinese interference. That includes securing supply chains for semiconductors, critical minerals, electric vehicles, and other high-value sectors. The Trans-Isthmus Corridor offers the US a rare opportunity to reshore influence, to create an industrial buffer zone just outside its southern border. Its proximity as a form of control. If factories are going to leave Asia, Washington wants to make sure they don't end up somewhere that's only geographically close, but ideologically distant. This is why so many US agencies and firms are pushing hard for investment along the corridor. Not just because they believe in Mexico's economic potential, but because they see this region as a containment line, a place to keep Chinese capital out, to shape the rules of the game before others can. For Washington, it's less about empowering Mexico and more about securing the system that the US itself depends on. The goal is stability, predictability, and alignment with American regulatory and security frameworks. It's about turning the corridor into a controlled artery of North American trade. But now, shift the lens to Mexico's perspective, and the picture becomes more complex and more revealing. Mexico isn't thinking in terms of ideological warfare. It's thinking in terms of leverage. For the first time in a long time, it has something the world desperately wants. And that changes the dynamics of every negotiation. Instead of being the recipient of conditional aid or the junior partner in trade talks, Mexico is now the provider of access, the gatekeeper to one of the hemisphere's most promising logistical backbones. And it's not wasting that opportunity. While Washington pushes for alignment, Mexico is quietly playing a multipolar game. Yes, it's welcoming US capital and cooperating with Western firms. But it's also expanding ties with Asian investors, European manufacturers, and global logistics firms that bring expertise and no political strings. It's opening the corridor to multiple players, not out of recklessness, but out of strategic calculation. The message is clear. This is not a US asset. It's a Mexican one, and it will be developed on Mexican terms. This tension has created an interesting paradox. The more the US wants to control the corridor, the more valuable it becomes to Mexico. Every dollar invested by American firms gives Mexico more political weight. Every logistics contract signed with US-backed companies becomes a bargaining chip in broader economic and migration negotiations. The asymmetry that defined the relationship for so long is starting to erode. Not because Mexico challenged it directly, but because geography and global shifts handed it a stronger position at the table. And then comes the question of what Mexico is actually gaining beyond the optics. This isn't just about foreign money flowing in, it's about building domestic capacity. Jobs are being created not only in construction, but in advanced manufacturing, software, energy, and telecommunications. Local governments are gaining access to federal and international development funds they've never seen before. Universities are being pulled into global research networks. Supply chains are localizing in a way that gives Mexican industries a greater share of the final product value. For once, Mexico isn't just assembling things, it's owning parts of the process. What's also happening, quietly but powerfully, is a shift in national identity. The corridor is becoming a symbol, not just of growth, but of capability. It's showing that Mexico doesn't have to follow a script written in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing. It can chart a path that is collaborative, but not dependent, open, but not vulnerable. That shift is psychological as much as it is political. It's changing how Mexico sees itself and how others are learning to see it. And yet, this dual-track development model won't be easy to maintain. Pressure will mount. The US will demand exclusivity in some areas. Domestic forces will question the foreign presence in others. But if Mexico can keep control over the narrative, if it can remain the driver and not just the passenger, then the Trans-Isthmus Corridor may be remembered not just as an economic project, but as the turning point where Mexico began to redefine its place in the world order. So now it's your turn. Do you think Mexico can keep playing both sides and still come out ahead? Or is it just a matter of time before it has to fully align with one superpower? Drop your thoughts in the comments. You can even write Mexico leads its own game if you believe in the country's independent strategy, or one side will win out if you think neutrality won't last. And of course, like the video if this insight is helping you see what's really unfolding beneath the headlines. Because next, we're going to look beyond trade and talk about what's truly at stake: migration, energy, and the new battle for control. The hidden stakes: energy, migration, and control. Behind the cranes, the contracts, and the buzzwords of development, there's another layer to the Trans-Isthmus Corridor, one that has nothing to do with shipping containers or GDP numbers. It's the layer no one talks about on the record, but everyone calculates behind closed doors. Because while the public narrative sells the corridor as a path for trade and progress, what's quietly unfolding beneath that is a complex architecture of power projection, migration management, energy flow, and regional control. And if you want to understand the full weight of what's at stake, you have to step outside the framework of commerce and look at what this corridor really enables. Let's start with migration. For years, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec has been one of the main overland routes used by migrants moving north from Central America. It's the choke point, the natural funnel. Thousands pass through it each week, on foot, by rail, through forests, across checkpoints. And while most global headlines reduce this to a border crisis, what's happening on the isthmus is far more strategic. By developing this corridor, by controlling who moves through it, how they're monitored, where they stop, Mexico is gaining a powerful new tool in managing migration flows, not just in reaction to pressure from the US, but on its own terms. It can now decide when to tighten and when to open. It can leverage migration policy in bilateral talks. It can offer regional stabilization as part of its value proposition to foreign investors and governments. The corridor becomes not just a trade route, but a human filter, a gate, and in some cases, a wall. Now add energy to the equation. The corridor isn't just lined with factories and ports, it's intersected by oil pipelines, gas transport infrastructure, and plans for future green energy corridors. Wind from the Pacific, solar from the Gulf, and storage facilities embedded deep into the southern terrain. What's being envisioned is more than transportation. It's an energy axis that connects not just two oceans, but two energy models: the fossil fuel legacy and the clean tech future. Whoever operates that grid, whoever sets the rules for how energy is moved, taxed, and priced, will hold enormous influence not just over Mexico, but over regional energy politics. And as the global race for renewables intensifies, that control becomes a coveted asset. But here's where it gets even more layered. The same infrastructure being built for cargo and migration control is dual use. Railroads, data cables, security stations, they can serve economic purposes, but they can also serve strategic ones. Logistics corridors can become military corridors. Surveillance systems can monitor trade, but also people, data, and threats. This is the hidden side of connectivity. The corridor strengthens not just Mexico's economy, but its sovereignty apparatus. And in doing so, it quietly shifts the security map of the region. That's not just theory, it's already being implemented. Mexico's National Guard has expanded its presence along the isthmus. Intelligence sharing agreements are increasing. Drones, biometric scanners, and integrated databases are being tested in tandem with logistics platforms. This isn't accidental, it's preparation. For a world where trade, migration, and security are no longer separate spheres, but overlapping interdependent systems of control. And it forces us to ask, who really benefits when a country controls all three at once? What Mexico is building, intentionally or not, is a form of soft authoritarian capacity through infrastructure, not in the political sense, but in the functional sense. The ability to track, channel, and influence multiple dimensions of life through a single geographic corridor. That's power, and it's not the kind of power most people see coming, because it doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't declare itself. It gets built into rail lines, fiber optics, energy conduits, and customs policies. It becomes the plumbing of the state. This is why the corridor matters far beyond economics. It's not just about global trade. It's about national posture. It's about shaping how Mexico defends itself, manages pressure, and asserts control in a world that's becoming harder to predict. And it's about proving that infrastructure is no longer neutral. It's political, it's strategic, and it's deeply human. In this way, the Trans-Isthmus project becomes a mirror. It reflects not just Mexico's ambitions, but its challenges, its ability to resist foreign dependency, its desire to rise without being absorbed, and its constant tension between development and autonomy. What's being constructed may look like progress, but beneath it is a new model of governance, one based not on ideology, but on access, flow, and control. And as we move into an age where the power to control movement of goods, of people, of data becomes more valuable than territory itself, the isthmus becomes less of a place and more of a lever. This is the strategic layer most don't see, but it's the one that will shape what happens next. Because as the corridor expands, so will the pressure to control it, from inside and outside. And the choices Mexico makes from here on won't just determine economic outcomes. They'll redefine the entire balance of how power moves through the Americas. So now I want to know how you see this. Does this kind of infrastructure strengthen democracy, or is it quietly building something else? Let me know in the comments. If you're seeing the deeper layers here, try phrases like "control moves faster than cargo" or "infrastructure is power" to join the conversation in a meaningful way. And if this content is helping you think beyond the headlines, hit like, subscribe, and get ready, because the next move belongs to you. If you've made it this far, we truly want to know, how did this message speak to your heart? Leave a comment below with the phrase, "I enjoyed the content," and feel free to share how this video resonated with you personally. Your story might inspire someone else who's also searching for deeper understanding in this complex world we live in. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on powerful, eye-opening content that goes beyond the headlines and gets to the truth. Hit the like button to support this mission and help this message reach more people who need to hear it. And of course, stick around. The next video is already queued up on the end screen, ready to take you even further on this journey of insight and transformation. May God bless your life powerfully, guide your thoughts, and strengthen your purpose. See you in the next one.